Okay, YouTubers, space detectives and pareidolia police. Today we are looking again at this image, MSL 1441 by Neville Thompson, who's put together this gigapan of loads and loads of images and stitched them all together, and they're really high quality and there's loads of clarity and detail here, as I've said before. I would advise you go back and watch my last 3 or 4 videos of this area, which cover this, and one next to it as well, and one near it. There's loads and loads of crazy things upon these ridges, which are in fact ruined buildings. These are not just buttes, as NASA calls them. These are buildings, and if you see my last few videos, you'll understand why. So I do advise you go back and see some of those. But the thing we're looking at today mainly is this. Okay, let's zoom right in. Now this looks a bit like a gun. Now it could actually just be a rock with what looks like a thin sort of part to it on top, but when you look at this more closely, it looks like a barrel sticking out. Now it doesn't mean it's actually a gun. This actually could be a bit of plumbing or something else that just happens to look a bit like a gun from this angle, like a gun turret even. But the problem is with that is that there are other guns in the area that have been spotted, or at least things that look like guns. Now let me show you the folder before we go into any. Actually no, what I'll do, I'll show you it in here because I've got it in my graphics processor here. Now I've brightened this up a bit so you can see it a bit more clearly, and when you go in close you can actually see some rather strange and interesting details. Now this does look like a gun barrel here. Obviously you can see that. Now if it is a gun, there's a slight problem with it because it's not straight. Now in order for a gun barrel to work, it has to be very, very straight indeed, so that the projectile doesn't get stuck. Now unfortunately with this thing we have these details here which make it look like it's bent. Okay, now that's more like something you would see on a bit of plumbing in your bathroom or in a house rather than an actual gun barrel, but that's assuming, of course, that this is a gun. It may not be. If this is a gun, then the projectile would probably get stuck in the barrel here because it's crinkled. Now, is it possible that this is actually a gun barrel? Because we've got a curve on the end. We've got a straight bit here, which I can't draw very well, sorry about that. And it's kind of straight there, but not. Now, this could actually be a silencer or something on the end. And if it is a gun, which it may well not be, of course, it may not actually fire what we would call shells, right? It may fire something else. Let's do that bit again. That wasn't quite right. That's better. So it looks like a gun barrel, but because it has a cylindrical kind of shape to it, and the shadow underneath here is what you would get on a gun barrel. But is it possible that it didn't fire? It didn't fire actual shells, that it fired something else? Who knows? Now, if you look even more closely, you can see it joins there. And this is kind of in front of it here. We have some detail here. This is very straight, this back bit. We've got some detail at the back. And it kind of joins on like that. And then we have this part, which has some interesting details in it. We've got something here. I don't know if you can see that. I'll brighten this up a bit more in a minute. But you've got these holes here in a line, which is very, very odd. Now that says to me that there's something very strange going on here, because if this was just a rock, then why would it have those holes in a straight line going up here? In fact, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's detail up here as well on this part. Very strange. That says to me artificial. So is it a gun? Is it something that looks like a gun? Is it a bit of plumbing? Is it a pipe? Take note of that barrel shape. It's got a kind of crinkled bit there, A bit like one of those bendy straws you use for drinking your soft drinks or whatever, you know? You see what I mean? It's got these crinkles in it. Now, of course, it may, if it is a gun, it may not have fired what we call shells. It could be some other type of gun. It could be a pulse weapon. I would imagine the Martians have things other than just standard shells. But we got detail here. Very interesting detail. You can see that pretty clearly. And all you've got to do is brighten it up a bit. Even in the raw image on the here, it's pretty bright already. All I've done is brighten it up. You can see that pretty clearly. So there we are. There it is. Now, what it did remind me of was this. Now, this is a video I did back in September. And it's called Machine Guns and Bunker on Mars. And this is from Sol 1454, so it's not very far from this ridgeline we're looking at today. It's very close to it. In fact, it's probably only about 100 meters away from that one, or less. And this is a very similar kind of find. It's on top of one of these ridges and looks like a gun. This was found by Terry Burnett. Interesting find this, and it's very also nearby this find is another one, so which should come up now. Here it is. Now I suggest you go back and watch this video, Machine Guns and Bunker on Mars, because what we have here down on the ground, not on top of the ridge like I just showed you the previous two, this is down on the ground, right next to the rover, we have what looks like a rusted and encrusted machine gun, which has some quite astonishing details in it, including a bolt here and a rather strange kind of mechanism sticking through it here, which you can see the detail of. There's the bolt. Now that is not a rock, and you can actually see where the gun parts, even on the back here, all kind of joined together like a bolt locking mechanism. Okay, so check that out. That's really interesting. So there are guns in the area, and there was this thing which I've shown many times before, which was spotted by Vladimir Vladimirov in 2017. This is a newer version of this video. I did this video years ago, and this is an update where I really brightened up the image much brighter and enhanced it a bit more so you can see the details. This is a tank. Now this is not taken by, or was not taken by, the Curiosity rover. This was taken by the Opportunity rover, which is now dead and has been for quite a while now, and is on top of a ridge, and you can see here what looks a bit like a T-34 Russian tank, but it's not a Russian tank, and it's not a T-34, but it does look like a tank. You can actually see, even in the raw image, you can see where what looks like a commander's copula, which is the hatch on top there. You can see that in the raw image. You can see the barrel, and it's even got that part to the barrel there where it starts off thicker, then there's the thinner part to the barrel. Okay, but look at the shape of it. It's very angled, which is quite unusual, that angle. Normally this part of the tank is straight. Now I've got my World of Tanks game up here. It's one of the only games I ever play, occasionally when I'm not too busy, which isn't very often. And I'm going to show you some tanks in here. Now look at this. Now this is an M4 Sherman, but this is a beefed up version of the M4. It's the M4A3E2. This is a World War II tank. Came in at the end of the war, 1945. It's like a Sherman, but it's got much more armour on it. But look at this angle here. You've got this angle. Now the actual tank itself looks more like this thing, which is a T-34. A bit like the one I just showed you. But this is straight. We've got a straight kind of edge to it. We've got angles at the front. The one on Mars has quite a definitive angle just here. And we've got what looks like a tank on the back there. Just there. Which was common in some tanks. In fact, Russian tanks have their extra fuel tanks on the outside of the tank. If they got hit by a shell, they would just burn off. And wouldn't catch the tank on fire. It would just burn away. The original video goes back to 2017, but this is the one to watch because it's got the brighter images in it and it shows you a bit more detail. I've really brightened the bejesus out of it here so you can see these outlines and shapes. But those details are in the image, and you just got to know how to brighten it up to see it. And there are links to these under the video. If you want to link to any of these images, you can download them from the links below. If the links don't work, do ask, because they have changed the NASA website since these were done. So a lot of the links may not now work, which is a bit of a problem. So if you want them, feel free to ask, no problem. So there was that, and there was also this thing. Now this looks like an SPG. Now this is more like one of these. Rather than being like a medium or small light tank like this is a medium tank. It's more like an SPG, which is a self-propelled gun. Now these aren't actual tanks. These are on a tank chassis, but these are artillery pieces, which is a different thing. These fire up into the air, long range, and sit way behind the battlefield, and they're designed to attack from miles away, usually a couple of miles behind the friendly lines. But there's loads of different types of these, and they're generally they're pretty big, but there are much smaller ones, depending on the caliber of the gun. This is quite a small one. There's all different sorts of these. Now, this thing on Mars doesn't seem to have wheels, but it does have what seems to be some interesting detail. I'll play that through a little bit. Now, this was something I published back in 2014 and made me quite famous for a while. There's the raw image. Now, it's a very poor image, and it's quite a long way off. And this is only maybe a couple of feet tall. It might be 3, it might be 1.5. I couldn't tell you exactly. I'll show you the gigapan of this in a second. Let me play that through. Now, what you've got to do is blur it to get rid of the distortion around. And what you get with JPEGs is you get distortion around the shapes. If you add blur, it gets rid of some of that distortion. Now, what some of this distortion is where you have a metallic object, much like this thing. Hang on. Where is it? There it is. When you have a metallic object, you get reflected light off it, where the sun's hitting it, like we have here. So we've got this kind of yellowish hue to the sky, even though that's sky behind. It's got a yellowish hue to it. Now that says to me that this has got a yellowish, kind of almost bronzy, kind of goldish looking colour, and you can see the light reflecting off it. Now, when you downgrade an image like to a JPEG and compress it, what happens is you get distortion around the edges, and you get this kind of weird, kind of almost like a halo effect. Okay, and that's what we're seeing with this thing here. You've got these kind of distorted halo type artifacts around the object. That's where the light's hitting it, and it's quite bright, and it's causing these reflections. And the JPEGs obviously pick that up, but where the JPEG's been compressed down, it's distorted it with pixelation. Now, this is weird. This is so weird, but it does look like a cannon, and it's not a lawnmower. There isn't much grass to be mown around here. Okay. So that was an old find from years ago, not long after I started my channel, back in 2014. I started the channel in 2013, so this was a year and a half later or whatever. But interesting details. Now take note of this stuff around it. Now this looks like stabilizers. Now, cannons tend to have stabilizers, artillery pieces. That's what this is. Now this isn't an SPG because it's not self-propelled. This is the sort of cannon that you would hitch to the back of a tank or a truck or something. So this doesn't move on its own power. This has to be towed away, okay, like picking up a trailer. It's got wheels, obviously, and it's got these stabilizing parts here, okay, and that would be towed away. So these are quite cumbersome to put in place, and they take a while to set up, whereas an SPG like this thing can just shoot and scoot and just fire off a few rounds and then change position quite rapidly. But of course, these are a lot more expensive to build and a lot more complex to operate in many ways. So, I mean, there are many types of these. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of types. But this looks like a fixed gun emplacement, where you have what looks like a base to it and stabilizers, like we have here and here. Okay, so that's what this looks like. This looks more like a fixed gun rather than an SPG, which is self-propelled and can drive away. This thing may have to be, or may have had to be, towed into position. But there's not really enough detail to tell because it's a long way off. Let's have a look at the gigapan of that. I've just dug this up for you. There it is. In fact, this is another PDS gigapan with Neville Thompson. Credit to him for this. But this is tiny. Now let me zoom out of that and show you where to look. You've got this dune field here, and you've got a slope on the right with lots of rocks on it. But how far away is that, would you say? 100 yards? 50 yards? I would say more like 50. But they're small. This thing is only about a foot or maybe 3 feet maximum. Now in this image you can't see quite so much detail, but it's a much more rounded shape, and you haven't got all the distortion in it because this is done with higher quality images, but it's a bit dark. It's a bit too dark to really see it in great detail. Unfortunately it's a bit dark, this one. But there it is, and it's pointing, I think, towards Mount Sharp, which is over here. Now, why would a gun be pointing towards Mount Sharp? Now, I said many years ago in some of my very early videos that I thought Mount Sharp was a military base, at least in part. So why would a gun be pointing towards it? Perhaps Mount Sharp was attacked, and perhaps that may explain why there are so many skulls and artifacts lying around, as well as there being burial mounds in the area. This is a bit further away from the burial mounds. Most of the burial mounds are around this area, which is around Sol 1400-ish to 1500-ish, which is the Murray Butts area, or Buttes, sorry, Murray Buttes area, okay? And these are all kind of big ridges sticking up, which are ruined buildings, and have loads of things on top of them and sticking out of them like we've shown today. Now, if you go back to Sol 703, that's before we came to the buttes and all the ruined buildings. So why would there be a small artillery piece, which is only a couple of feet tall, pointing towards Mount Sharp? Now Mount Sharp is over here, beyond these blue dunes over here. You go right up there, and Mount Sharp is up there. Now, could this explain, if this is pointed towards Mount Sharp, could this explain why there are certain things that are so badly damaged on Mount Sharp and around it? Maybe this is one of many little artillery pieces that was pointed at Mount Sharp in some kind of battle at one point. Now, that got me thinking. Huge structures, buildings on Mars, Colossus. Right, now there's what looks like a massive Colossus kind of statue on top of Mount Sharp here, okay? It's not on top, but it's near the top. This is about 10 kilometres away from the rover, both in distance and height. If you measure both of it together, it's about 10 kilometres, maybe 11. Now, that gun is pointing almost precisely at this area. Here's the Colossus statue here, with the arm and the shoulder. And now I'll animate it, and I'll draw a head on it. Now the head may be down here, just here. But this is what it may have looked like, or at least partly. I can't tell you exactly what the head would have looked like, but if you need to watch this video, and it will explain a lot more about the details I came to here, and why I chose that kind of style. Because many of the other things that have been found in the area do look kind of almost like Roman or Greek helmets, and look quite ancient. And this may have been a very ancient city area. Well, it was an ancient city area on Mount Sharp. We have the Forbidden City and many, many crazy structures. This is about 500 feet tall, 400 to 500 feet tall. It may be 350, it may be 450. It could be more. But that's the right scale for the head. And you can see the arm here, details here. And you've got a strap coming across here. This is probably carved out of stone. You've got a kind of slight kind of cliff edge behind it, which was kind of been carved out of to support it, it seems. But the head's been shot off or broken off, and that is either it there or here. You can see a head kind of shaped thing there. I could be wrong. There we are. Now, is it possible that that artillery piece that's pointing at Mount Sharp may be one of the things that blew the head off or damaged it and caused the head to fall off? Who knows? Pure speculation, of course. I couldn't possibly prove that. But there are a number of guns in the area, but most of them are not pointing at Mount Sharp. This is the only one that's been found that is. Most of the guns or things that look like guns seem to be defending the area rather than attacking it. So that's an interesting thing to contemplate. And it may explain why a lot of these old buildings here, buttes or butts, I like to call them, Seymour butts, that may explain why a lot of these old structures look like bunkers and have these guns on top of them, like we have with this one. Let's go back a bit with this one, and it will show you. This is a very similar looking butt or ruined building that here, and we've got these kind of square parts to it, and there's like an entrance down here, and yeah, we can see actually that there's also, well, it looks like a slit here, like a bunker kind of window. So is it possible that these very ancient structures were built on by military people later on when they were already ruined, and turned into sort of a defensive kind of perimeter around Mount Sharp to defend it from somebody attacking from the ground? This is another one of those complicated ones where there's lots of similar things, but they need to be explained. You can't just show a picture and expect everyone to understand what you're trying to get across. Sometimes you have to explain these things in detail to actually link them together and try and make sense of some of these crazy things that we've spotted over the years in Gale crater and elsewhere on Mars also. Mars weapons, guns, cannons, possible energy weapons, who knows what they were using. But I have found things that look like cannonballs and old-fashioned looking pistols that look like old flintlock pistols almost, the type we would have had hundreds of years ago. So a lot of these things are very old and antique, it seems, but there may be more modern weapons in between that were used in more recent times. How long ago? I couldn't tell you. This is Mars, of course, so they wouldn't have followed exactly the same sort of timeline as us, but it could have been quite similar in many ways, with both old and modern civilizations overlapping each other. And perhaps they were attacked by a much more advanced civilization, or another race of people, or another group of people from another part of Mars. Perhaps they were fighting over the diminishing and evaporating water that was on the surface. And Gale crater would have been one of the last places on Mars with liquid water because of its thermal properties and possible water coming up from the ground. And Mount Sharp itself, I would imagine, would have water supplies below it. There may be many caverns full of water underneath this mountain, in this low crater, okay, which was once a lake area. So I'd imagine you could go down below the surface and there'd be water not very far down. So perhaps that's what was fought over in this area. So thanks for watching, everybody. That was a long one. Thanks for watching. See you soon.